They called her the beast in the sack, but the cowboy found his heart inside it. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. This is a tale from the rugged Wild West, where the harsh winds of prejudice and isolation can shape the lives of those who dare to live outside the narrow boundaries of society. Our story begins with a woman who was known throughout the town as the beast in the sack. Her name was May, but no one dared to call her that. She was a woman of extraordinary size, towering over most men and broad in ways that made people uncomfortable. Her large frame and commanding presence made her an object of ridicule, and cruel rumors circulated about her. They said that she was as monstrous on the inside as she was on the outside. They mocked her with every step she took, calling her names that cut deeper than any blade ever could. Despite her kindness and her ability to help anyone in need, May was treated like an outcast. She had learned to keep her head down and avoid the townsfolk's judgment. Her life was one of solitude and quiet strength, but in her heart, she longed for something more. She longed for someone who could see past the surface, someone who could appreciate the depth of her character and the warmth of her heart. Meanwhile, in the same town, there was a cowboy named Jack. Jack had always kept to himself, his heart scarred by the losses he had suffered in the past. He had no interest in love, no interest in getting close to anyone. His life revolved around his ranch, his cattle, and the simple, solitary existence he had chosen for himself. He was content in his loneliness, or so he thought. Jack had heard the rumors about May, of course. He had heard the whispers, the laughter behind her back, and he had always kept his distance. But one day, his life took an unexpected turn. It was a late afternoon when Jack found himself riding his horse toward the outskirts of town. As he passed by the edge of the woods, he saw her. May. She was struggling, her large frame bent over as she tried to lift a fallen log from the path. Without thinking, Jack dismounted and hurried over to her. "Need some help?" he asked, his voice rough from years of solitude. May looked up in surprise, her wide eyes meeting his. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, May nodded slowly, a mix of relief and skepticism in her gaze. Jack stepped forward, and together, they lifted the log. It was heavier than either of them had expected, but with a few grunts of effort, they managed to clear the path. As they stood there, catching their breath, Jack noticed something he hadn't before. May wasn't just a giant woman. She wasn't some monstrous figure to be feared or mocked. She was real. She was strong. She was kind. And in that moment, Jack felt something stir in his chest, something he hadn't felt in years: admiration. The encounter was brief, but it left an impression on both of them. For May, it was the first time in a long time that someone had looked at her with respect, not judgment. For Jack, it was the first time in ages that he had seen beyond someone's appearance to the person inside. They exchanged a few words, but neither said much. Jack didn't ask May about the rumors, and May didn't bring them up. Instead, they parted ways, each of them feeling something shift in the air around them. Jack's thoughts lingered on May long after he had returned to his ranch. He couldn't shake the image of her face, the way she had looked at him, not with anger or bitterness, but with quiet strength. He found himself wondering, who was she really? What had her life been like? And why had he never taken the time to get to know her? The next day, Jack found himself riding toward May's cabin, drawn by an unfamiliar sense of urgency. He didn't know what he was expecting, but when he arrived, he found May sitting outside, staring at the horizon. She didn't seem surprised to see him, but there was a hint of wariness in her eyes. Jack didn't know what he was doing, but he knew he had to say something. I just wanted to make sure you're all right," he said, his voice softer than usual. May's eyes softened, and for the first time, she smiled. "I'm fine," she replied. "Just fine." Jack stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do next. Then, without thinking, he sat down beside her. For the first time, they sat together in silence, both of them understanding something they hadn't before. May wasn't a beast. She wasn't someone to be feared. She was a woman, a person with hopes, dreams, and a heart just like anyone else. And Jack wasn't alone in the world anymore. Not anymore. The next few days felt different for Jack. Ever since meeting May, there was something stirring in his chest, something unfamiliar and yet unmistakable. He couldn't stop thinking about her, about how she had looked at him that day with those eyes. Eyes that held pain, but also an undeniable strength. He had never met anyone like her before. She was so much more than what the town said about her. The rumors, the mocking names, none of it mattered when he saw the real May. He felt a strange pull, a curiosity, an urge to know her story. Jack found himself riding past her cabin more often, sometimes just to check on her, sometimes to find an excuse to see her again. She was always outside, doing something, whether it was mending fences, hauling wood, or tending to a small garden by her cabin. She never seemed to ask for help, but Jack always offered. And she always accepted, though there was something in the way she did it that told him she wasn't used to kindness without a hidden agenda. It wasn't long before their conversations became more comfortable, their silences less awkward. May wasn't just strong physically. She was sharp, and the way she spoke showed a wisdom that Jack hadn't expected. He found himself enjoying their talks more and more, the way they could speak about anything, from the weather to their pasts, without fear of judgment. May shared a bit about her life, a life full of hardship, loss, and survival. She had been cast out by her family at a young age, her only companions the animals she cared for and the land she worked. She had never asked for much, just acceptance. And yet, the world had refused to give her that. Jack listened to her story with rapt attention, feeling a growing admiration for her resilience. She had lived a life most people couldn't even imagine, and yet she never let it break her. He could see it in the way she carried herself, the quiet dignity in her every move. It was hard to imagine the cruel names people had called her, hard to reconcile the May he knew with the one they talked about. Jack, in return, shared his own story. His was one of loss too, though different. He had once been a part of a family, a farm family, until a fire had taken everything from him, his home, his family, his future. Since then, he had lived alone, tending to his cattle, building a life from the ashes of the past. But his loneliness was a different kind of isolation, one that came from the weight of old wounds, the kind that never really healed. May listened, never interrupting. But Jack could tell that she understood, that she too had felt the kind of pain that carved deep lines into a person's soul. Their conversations continued, slow at first, but then more natural, as if they had known each other for years instead of only days. Jack started to look forward to their meetings, to the way May's presence made him feel less alone in the world. There was something comforting in her steadiness, her ability to stand tall in the face of everything that had tried to break her. And slowly, without either of them quite realizing it, their bond began to change. It wasn't just friendship anymore. Jack couldn't deny it. He was falling for her. It wasn't the way he had imagined falling in love. There was no grand gesture, no dramatic moment. It was more like the steady build of something solid, something real. He found himself caring more for May, wanting to protect her, to be the one to stand by her side. But there was a nagging fear in him too, a fear that kept him from saying what he was feeling. Would she feel the same way? Could someone like him ever truly be what she needed? The fear of rejection haunted him, but he knew he couldn't keep hiding his feelings. The next time he saw her, Jack decided he would speak up. He had to. He couldn't keep pretending that nothing had changed between them. As he approached May's cabin one evening, he saw her standing outside, her back to him as she gazed at the setting sun. The light cast a golden glow over her, and for a moment, Jack just watched her, his heart heavy with unspoken words. This time, he wouldn't hold back. He would tell her how he felt, no matter what. He took a deep breath and walked forward, his boots crunching on the gravel as he called out her name. May turned, her face lighting up with a smile when she saw him. But this time, it wasn't just a smile of greeting. It was the kind of smile that made Jack's heart race. She stepped toward him, her eyes warm, and for the first time, Jack felt like he wasn't the only one carrying a burden. "Hey," May said softly, her voice carrying that same steady strength that had drawn him to her in the first place. "What's on your mind?" Jack hesitated for a moment, his words catching in his throat. But then he let them spill out. "I just wanted to say that. I don't know how to explain it, but I feel something that I haven't felt in a long time. And I don't want to keep pretending that I don't." May looked at him, her expression softening, and for a moment, the world seemed to stop. She didn't say anything, but the way she looked at him made his heart skip a beat. It was the kind of look that told him she already knew, that she had been waiting for him to say it. "Jack," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I felt it too." And just like that, everything changed. The distance between them vanished, and in its place, something new blossomed, a connection that went beyond appearance, beyond fear. It was real, and it was theirs. Days passed, and Jack found himself thinking about May more than he ever thought possible. It was strange, this feeling growing in him. Every time he saw her, the world seemed to shift in a way he couldn't quite explain. May had become a part of his life, but it wasn't just her physical presence that captivated him. It was the way she made him feel, strong, not in the sense of his physical strength, but in a deeper, more vulnerable way. He had spent so many years running from the world, hiding from his past, but with May, he felt like he could breathe. She had this effect on him that no one else ever had. It wasn't about the way she looked, though he found her beautiful in a way that went far beyond the surface. It was the way she spoke, the way she moved, the way she saw the world. She had lived a hard life, and yet she never let it break her. Her strength wasn't just in her size, it was in her spirit. May had started to open up to Jack more in the past few days. She told him stories about her childhood, how she had been cast out by her family, how she had learned to survive in a world that constantly judged her for things beyond her control. Jack listened, sometimes in silence, sometimes with questions, but always with the kind of attention he hadn't given to anyone in a long time. May had spent years believing that she was destined to live alone, that her size, her difference, had placed her outside the reach of love. But Jack had slowly begun to prove her wrong. She hadn't expected this, hadn't expected him to see her, really see her. To see her as a woman, not just a label or a caricature. They spent more time together, whether working on small tasks around the cabin or sitting quietly in the evenings, watching the sun dip below the horizon. There was something comforting about their silences, something that didn't need to be filled with words. It was the kind of silence that said everything, and yet nothing at all. One evening, as they sat on the porch, May turned to him with a question that had been on her mind for days. "Jack," she said softly, her voice low but steady, "why did you come here? Why did you help me that first day?" Jack looked at her, his gaze thoughtful. He had been asking himself the same thing. He hadn't known why he had gone to her that day, or why he had continued to come back. It wasn't like him to get involved in anyone's life, let alone someone like May. But there was something in her, something about the way she had looked at him that first day, that had drawn him in. "I don't really know," he said after a pause. I guess I just couldn't leave you there, struggling alone. There's something about you, May. Something I haven't been able to shake since we met. Maybe I was tired of being alone, or maybe I was just tired of running from my past. But when I saw you, I didn't see the beast they talked about. I saw a person who didn't deserve to be treated the way you've been." May's eyes softened, and she gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "I never asked for any of it," she whispered. Jack nodded. "I know, and I'm sorry the world's been so cruel to you. But I want you to know something. I'm not going anywhere, May. I'm here, for as long as you'll have me." His words hung in the air, heavy with the promise they carried. May was silent for a moment, processing what he had said. Then, without another word, she leaned in and kissed him. A soft, gentle kiss that spoke volumes more than any words ever could. It wasn't a kiss filled with passion, but with understanding, with years of unspoken emotions finally finding release. When they pulled apart, May's eyes were filled with a mixture of gratitude and something else, something Jack couldn't quite name, but something he hoped would become clearer as time went on. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for seeing me." Jack smiled, his heart lighter than it had been in years. "I've been seeing you from the moment I laid eyes on you." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of small moments, working side by side, laughing at the simplest things, and growing closer with each passing day. Their bond deepened, no longer just an exchange of words, but something more, something real. Jack found himself falling for May in ways he hadn't expected. But with each passing day, his love for her grew stronger. He didn't care about the rumors anymore. He didn't care about the way the world had looked at her. He only cared about the woman in front of him, the woman who had the courage to live her truth, even when the world tried to force her to hide. May, in turn, found herself starting to believe in love again. She had spent so long thinking she was undeserving of it, thinking that her size had made her unworthy. But Jack had proven her wrong. He loved her, not in spite of who she was, but because of who she was. May had never felt more alive, more accepted, than she did in Jack's arms. They both knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The world would continue to judge them, to whisper behind their backs. But they had each other, and that was enough. For the first time in her life, May felt like she was home. And for the first time in a long time, Jack felt like he wasn't alone anymore. Together, they would face whatever challenges the world had in store for them, side by side. As the weeks passed, Jack and May's bond grew stronger, but so did the challenges they faced. The town was beginning to talk, and whispers of their growing relationship reached the ears of those who had once mocked May and written her off. At first, the gossip seemed harmless, just idle chatter among the townsfolk. But soon, it became clear that their connection was more than just a source of gossip. It was a threat to the deeply rooted prejudices in the town. May had never cared much for the opinions of others. She had spent most of her life being judged by people who didn't know her, and she had learned to ignore the cruel words. But now, with Jack by her side, she couldn't help but feel a little uneasy. It wasn't just the whispers anymore. People were beginning to look at her differently. The looks, the sideways glances, the muttered comments, they all reminded her of the isolation she had lived with for so long. It was as if, despite everything they had shared, the world still couldn't accept her for who she truly was. Jack could see the change in May. He could see the weight she was carrying, the way the constant judgment was beginning to wear her down. He hated it. He hated that she had to live with the burden of other people's ignorance. But he wasn't about to let her face it alone. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip low in the sky, Jack decided that enough was enough. He had spent far too many years running from his past, too many years hiding from the world. And now, with May, he wasn't going to let anyone, or anything, tear them apart. May, he said, his voice steady and firm, we need to do something about this. It's not right, what they're saying about you. About us. We can't just stand by and let them make you feel less than you are. May looked at him, her expression unreadable, but Jack could see the conflict in her eyes. Jack, I've been living with this my whole life. I know what people think of me, and I've learned to live with it. I don't need anyone's approval, especially not from people who don't even know me. Jack took her hands in his touch gentle but insistent. I know, but you deserve more than that. You deserve to be seen for who you truly are, not for the lies they've spread. We can't let them define you. You're more than what they say. May's gaze softened as she looked at him, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of relief. Jack wasn't just fighting for her. He was fighting with her, and that meant everything. But May knew it wouldn't be easy. The town wasn't going to change overnight, and their relationship wasn't going to be accepted just because they wanted it to be. The weight of the town's judgment still hung over them like a dark cloud. But May wasn't as afraid anymore. She had Jack, and for the first time in her life, she felt like she had someone who truly saw her. Together, they made a plan. They wouldn't hide. They wouldn't let the world's cruel opinions shape their future. They would stand up for themselves, for their love. The next day, Jack and May went to town together, holding their heads high as they walked down the main street. The townspeople watched, their eyes filled with judgment, but Jack and May didn't flinch. They walked with purpose, side by side, ready to face whatever came their way. It wasn't easy. The stares, the whispers, the cold shoulders, they were all there, just like May had expected. But with Jack by her side, it didn't feel so unbearable. They didn't say a word to the people who watched them with disdain, but their actions spoke louder than any words could. They weren't hiding anymore. They weren't ashamed of who they were or who they loved. May felt the eyes of the town on her, but she no longer felt the crushing weight of their judgment. She had Jack, and that was all that mattered. They spent the rest of the day in the town, running errands, talking to people, and letting the world see that they were a team, unshakable in their bond. It wasn't long before others started to notice. A few of the townspeople who had once been harsh toward May began to soften, their expressions less judgmental as they saw her standing tall beside Jack. Some even offered small smiles of recognition, a silent acknowledgement that they saw the woman May truly was. The change wasn't dramatic, but it was a start. May couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. She had spent so many years hiding, so many years thinking that she was destined to live in the shadows. But now, With Jack's unwavering support, she felt like she was finally stepping into the light. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, May and Jack returned to their cabin, their hearts a little lighter than before. May had faced her greatest fear, the judgment of others, and she had come out stronger for it. And Jack? He had found the courage to stand beside her, to fight for what was right, and in doing so, he had found something he hadn't even known he was looking for: love. Together, they were unstoppable, and no matter what the world threw at them, they would face it together. The days that followed their bold stand in town were a mix of both relief and quiet tension. May and Jack had faced the world together, but now they were beginning to feel the weight of the challenge ahead. The town hadn't fully embraced their relationship yet, but they had made a statement. And that statement, however subtle, had made an impact. People were starting to look at May differently. The whispers, the mocking glances, they were still there, but they were fewer, less biting. Jack could see it in May's eyes every time she stepped outside. There was a flicker of hope in her that hadn't been there before, a sense of possibility that things might finally change. Jack, too, felt the shift. For the first time in years, he wasn't afraid to walk with his head held high. May had shown him what it meant to stand tall in the face of adversity, and he wasn't going to let her do it alone. The small moments were what kept them going. In the evenings, after a long day of working the land, they would sit together on the porch, their hands finding each other without a word. Sometimes, they would share stories of their past, finding comfort in the shared silence between them. Jack would tell her about his life before the fire, his family, the farm, and the dreams that had once seemed so distant. May, in turn, spoke of the loneliness she had faced for so long, of the years she had spent trying to survive in a world that had always viewed her as too different. It was during one of these evenings that Jack realized just how much he had come to rely on May's presence. It wasn't just that he loved her, it was how she made him feel. She had broken through walls he hadn't even realized he had built. She had made him believe in love again, in a way that was pure and unashamed. But there was still something Jack hadn't told her, something that had been eating at him since they first started spending time together. It was the past, his past, and it was something he knew he couldn't keep hidden from her any longer. He had never intended to keep it from her, but the time hadn't felt right. But now, with the way they were growing closer, he knew he couldn't keep running from it. May deserved the truth. May, Jack said one evening, his voice soft but serious. She looked up from her place beside him, her eyes curious. There's something I need to tell you. Something about my past that I've never shared with anyone. May's expression softened, and she gave him a reassuring smile. You don't have to tell me if you're not ready, Jack. I'm here for you, no matter what. Jack nodded, grateful for her understanding. But he knew he had to say it. He had to face it. Before the fire, I had a family. A wife. A son. May's eyes widened slightly, but she said nothing, waiting for him to continue. The fire, it took everything. My wife, my son, and the life we had built together. I was left with nothing but the land and my memories. I couldn't let go of it. I couldn't move past it. That's why I've kept to myself all these years. I didn't think I could ever love again, and I certainly didn't think I deserved to. But when I met you, everything changed. You made me see that I wasn't beyond saving. May's hand found his, her fingers curling around his as she listened, her gaze steady and compassionate. Jack's heart ached with the weight of his confession, but he felt a sense of release too, like a burden had been lifted. I don't want to hide from you anymore, May. You've become everything to me, and I don't want to keep this from you. May squeezed his hand, her expression gentle. Jack, I'm not here to judge you. I'm here because I see you, the real you. I see your heart, your pain, and your strength. We all have scars. We all have a past. But what matters is what we do with it. And you're doing more than just surviving, Jack. You're living. And that's something to be proud of. Jack smiled at her words, his chest tight with emotion. She was right. It wasn't about the past anymore. It was about the future they could build together. May had shown him that love wasn't about perfection. It was about acceptance, about sharing your flaws and your strengths, and choosing to stand by each other, no matter what. The next few days were filled with a sense of quiet peace. Jack had been honest with May, and she had responded with nothing but understanding and love. The world outside still hadn't fully accepted them, but Jack and May were no longer concerned with the opinions of others. They had each other, and that was enough. They continued to work side by side, their lives slowly intertwining, like the roots of two trees growing together. But just when they thought they had begun to find their rhythm, something unexpected happened. One afternoon, a group of men from the town came to the ranch. Jack didn't recognize them, but he could see the look of disdain in their eyes. They had come for a reason, and it wasn't to offer congratulations. "We need to talk," Jack, one of them said, stepping forward. "It's about the woman you're with." Jack's stomach sank. He knew exactly where this was going. May, standing quietly beside him, gave him a look. She didn't need to hear what they had to say. She already knew. But Jack wasn't about to let them dictate his life any longer. He stood tall, facing the men with the same strength he had found in himself over the past few months. "She's not going anywhere," Jack said firmly. "And neither am I. If you've got a problem with that, you can leave now." The men exchanged uncomfortable glances, but none of them spoke. Jack's words hung in the air, and for the first time, he realized how much he had changed. He wasn't the same man who had hidden away, afraid to stand up for what he believed in. He was stronger now, stronger because of May. And together, they would face whatever came next. The tension that had built up in the air over the past few days seemed to reach its peak when the group of men from town showed up at the ranch. Jack stood tall, his chest out, his resolve stronger than ever. He had May by his side, and that made all the difference. The men stood in front of him, staring at him with a mixture of disdain and curiosity, but Jack wasn't intimidated. He had nothing to fear anymore. May had changed everything for him. "What's this about?" Jack asked, his voice calm but firm. The man who had spoken earlier, the one who seemed to be in charge, took a step forward. "We need to talk about the woman you're with," he said, his voice laced with judgment. Jack's eyes narrowed. "What's your problem with her?" he asked, not bothering to hide his frustration. The man hesitated for a moment, clearly trying to find the right words, but Jack could see the hesitation. He could tell this wasn't just about May anymore. This was about them. "You know how people talk, Jack? It's not right, her being with you. People don't take kindly to that kind of thing around here." Jack stood his ground. "And what kind of thing is that? She's a person, just like anyone else. Just like me." May, standing quietly beside Jack, didn't flinch. She had heard these words all her life, but now, she wasn't the one shrinking back. She wasn't the one hiding. She was standing tall, right next to Jack, and for the first time in her life, she felt like she belonged. She had someone who saw her for who she was, not the rumors, not the whispers. And with that thought, May stepped forward, her voice steady. "I don't need your approval," she said, looking each man in the eye. "I never have, but I will not hide anymore. Not for you, not for anyone." Jack could feel the pride swelling in his chest as he looked at May. She had a strength in her that he had always admired, but now, seeing it firsthand, he realized just how much she had impacted him. He wasn't the man he had been before. He wasn't the man who ran away from everything, from his past, from his fears. He was standing here now, with May, fighting for something worth fighting for. The man who had spoken before looked uneasy, but Jack could see the change in him. The moment of hesitation was telling. "We're just saying," the man began again, his voice faltering. "It's not easy for the rest of us to accept something like this." Jack took a step closer, his voice low but steady. "I don't care what's easy for you. I'm not asking for your acceptance. I'm standing here with the woman I love, and if you have a problem with that, then that's your issue, not mine." The tension hung thick in the air for a long moment. The men exchanged glances, some clearly uncomfortable, others still holding on to their prejudices. But no one spoke. Jack and May stood there, side by side, unwavering. May felt something shift in the air around her. It was as if, for the first time, the town was seeing her, not as the outcast, not as the beast, but as someone who deserved respect, someone who deserved love. And that made all the difference. After what felt like an eternity, the men finally backed down. They muttered among themselves, but there were no more harsh words, no more judgment. They slowly began to turn and leave, clearly not expecting Jack to stand his ground. May watched them go, her heart pounding in her chest, but she didn't feel fear. She felt victorious. This was the first time in her life that she had stood up for herself, and it felt liberating. Jack reached out, taking her hand in his. "You did great," he said quietly, his voice full of admiration. May looked up at him, a smile tugging at her lips. "We did great," she replied, squeezing his hand. As the men disappeared down the road, Jack and May stood there for a long time, taking in the weight of what had just happened. They had faced down the town together, and they had won. It wasn't the kind of victory that would make headlines. It wasn't the kind of victory that came with grand gestures or applause. But it was theirs. It was real. And that was enough. The rest of the evening was quiet, but there was a sense of peace that settled over the ranch. Jack and May spent the night talking, laughing, and making plans for the future. For the first time in a long time, they both felt like they were where they belonged. The next day, the town was a little different. The whispers were still there, but they weren't as loud, and May felt the shift. She didn't know if the town would ever fully accept her, but that didn't matter anymore. She had Jack, and Jack had her. Together, they were stronger than anything the world could throw at them. The next few weeks passed peacefully, with Jack and May continuing to work side by side. They faced challenges, of course, but they faced them together, as a team. And slowly, but surely, the town began to see that their love was real. It wasn't something to be feared or ridiculed. It was something to be respected. May had found her place in the world, and she had found it beside Jack. And that was more than she had ever hoped for. The journey ahead wasn't going to be easy, but May knew one thing for sure. As long as she had Jack by her side, there was nothing they couldn't face together. The days following their confrontation with the townspeople were filled with a sense of newfound determination for both Jack and May. They knew that the battle was far from over, but the events of the past week had cemented their resolve. The weight of the world was still on their shoulders, but they were ready to face whatever came. Next, together. May had never thought she would be able to stand so boldly in front of the world, but with Jack by her side, she felt a strength she had never known before. Jack, too, found a quiet confidence in her presence. She had made him believe in himself again, in a way that no one else ever had. Yet, despite their growing confidence, the world around them still felt uncertain. The town had begun to quiet down, but the undercurrent of judgment remained, always there, waiting to rear its ugly head. Jack could sense it, just like May could. They were still outsiders, still the subject of whispers and sideways glances. But they were no longer afraid of it. They had each other, and for the first time in a long while, that was enough. May spent her days working alongside Jack, her hands calloused from the hard labor, her mind at peace for the first time in years. She had always thought that being accepted by the world was the answer, but now she realized that the true reward was the quiet peace she found in her own heart. Jack's presence brought her a sense of belonging that she had never thought possible. She no longer needed the approval of others. What mattered now was that she was finally living her truth. One evening, as they worked late into the night, May looked up at Jack. The moonlight shone softly on his face, and for a moment, she simply watched him, taking in the man he had become. He had saved her in more ways than one, not just by standing up for her, but by showing her that she deserved love. May had spent so much of her life thinking she wasn't worthy of love, of being seen. But Jack had shattered that belief. She could hardly believe how far they had come. "Jack," May said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. He turned to her, his eyes soft with affection. "Yeah, I never thought this would be my life. I never thought I'd find someone like you. Someone who sees me, really sees me." Jack smiled at her, the corners of his eyes crinkling as he stepped closer. "You're more than I ever could have imagined," he replied, his voice low and sincere. May felt her heart swell as he spoke. There were no grand gestures, no declarations of love, just the simple truth between them. They had come to know each other in the most honest, vulnerable way possible. And it was enough. As the days passed, the tension in the town seemed to shift. People who had once avoided May now greeted her with nods, some even offering small smiles. It was slow, almost imperceptible, but it was happening. The whispers were still there, but they weren't as sharp. May knew that the road ahead wouldn't be without challenges. There would always be people who would judge her, who would never accept her or Jack. But they had proven something that no one could take away from them. Their love was real, and it was stronger than any prejudice. One afternoon, as Jack and May walked through the town together, something unexpected happened. A woman who had once been one of the loudest critics of May stopped them in the street. May tensed, unsure of what to expect, but the woman's expression was different this time. "I wanted to apologize," the woman said, her voice hesitant. "For the things I said. For the things I thought. I was wrong." May stared at her for a long moment, unsure if she had heard her correctly. The woman went on. You don't deserve the way people treated you. I see it now. I see you. May felt a warmth spread through her chest. It wasn't forgiveness she was looking for, but this moment was more than she could have imagined. She nodded slowly, a quiet acknowledgement of the change that had taken place. Thank you, May said softly, her voice steady but full of emotion. As the woman walked away, Jack turned to May, a smile tugging at his lips. Did that just happen? He asked, his voice filled with disbelief. May laughed, shaking her head. I think so. I never expected that. Jack took her hand, squeezing it gently. Neither did I, but I think it's a good sign. May's heart felt lighter than it had in years. She had spent so much of her life feeling like an outsider, like she didn't belong. But now, she was finally beginning to feel like she had a place in this world. And that place, she realized, was by Jack's side. Together, they had faced the harshest of judgments, the hardest of battles, and they had come out stronger. There would be more challenges, more hurdles to overcome, but May knew one thing for sure. They would face them together. And that made all the difference. The evening sky began to darken, casting a purple hue over the land, and May and Jack stood in silence, their hearts full, knowing that whatever came next, they would be ready. They had each other, and that was more than enough. The days that followed their encounter with the townspeople brought a quiet sense of triumph. But the weight of what was to come was never far from Jack and May's minds. They had stood up to the world together, but the world wasn't done testing them. The town had begun to accept them in small ways. There were fewer whispers, fewer sideways glances, but there were still those who couldn't see past the prejudice that had defined their lives for so long. May had never expected full acceptance, but there was a part of her that longed for it, just a little. Jack, too, had always kept his distance from people, building walls around himself to keep his heart safe. But now, with May, everything had changed. They had found something in each other that neither had expected, a love that was pure and honest, and that gave them both the strength to face whatever came next. One crisp morning, as the sun rose over the horizon, Jack and May found themselves in the middle of another difficult moment. It wasn't just the town's attitude that they had to contend with, it was the land itself. They had been working hard, but the crops had failed again. The drought was taking its toll, and despite all their efforts, they were running out of time. The town had already begun to talk about the possibility of a settlement, and Jack knew they couldn't keep relying on their luck. We can't keep going like this, May, Jack said as they surveyed the dry land together, the sun beating down on them. The crops won't grow, and the cattle aren't doing well. If we don't do something soon, we'll lose everything. May stood beside him, her face set in determination. We'll figure it out, Jack. We always do, she said, her voice steady. We've made it this far. We're not going to give up now. Jack looked at her, a sense of awe filling him. Despite everything, despite the hardships and the judgment, May never backed down. She faced every challenge head on, and that made her stronger than anyone he knew. Jack had learned more from her than he could ever have imagined. They had come this far, together, and he wasn't about to let go now. But the reality of their situation was undeniable. The land was struggling, and so were they. May could see the weight of it in Jack's eyes. He was doing everything he could, but even he couldn't control the weather. She reached out and touched his arm gently, drawing his attention back to her. We don't need to do it all at once, she said softly. One step at a time. We have each other. We'll find a way. Jack nodded, the tension in his shoulders easing a little. May was right. They had each other. And as long as they had that, they could face anything. Later that evening, as they sat by the fire, Jack and May spoke about their plans for the future. They didn't have all the answers, but they had hope. They talked about finding ways to make the land work, ways to rebuild their lives together. For the first time in a long time, Jack felt like they had a real chance. He hadn't had hope in years, but now, with May by his side, he was starting to believe again. The next few days were filled with hard work. Jack and May spent every waking hour trying to salvage what they could from the land, planting new crops where they could and caring for the animals. They worked until the sun went down, but despite their efforts, the drought showed no signs of easing. It felt like every step they took was uphill. But then, something unexpected happened. One afternoon, a group of townspeople came to the ranch. At first, Jack thought they were there to offer more criticism, more judgment. But as they got closer, he saw the change in their faces. They weren't here to condemn them. They were here to offer help. "We've been talking," one of the men said, his voice hesitant but sincere. "We've seen what you two are doing out here, and we know it's not easy. We want to help." Jack blinked, unsure if he was hearing correctly. "Help? What do you mean?" The man stepped forward, his face serious. "We know about the drought, and we know how hard you've been working. We've all seen the way you've stood up for each other, how you've faced this head on. So, we've decided to come together and lend a hand. We're going to help you with the crops, with the land. We're all in this together." Jack was stunned. He had never expected this. May looked at the group of men and women, her eyes wide with disbelief. "You're really going to help us?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. The man nodded. "We've all got our own struggles, but we can't just stand by and watch you two lose everything. It's time we start supporting each other." Jack felt a lump rise in his throat as the realization hit him. This wasn't just about the land. This wasn't just about survival. This was about community, about people coming together in the face of adversity. He had spent so many years isolated, so many years believing that he had to do everything on his own. But now, he saw that he didn't have to. He didn't have to carry the weight of the world alone. May stood beside him, her hand on his arm, and together, they looked at the group of townspeople who were willing to help them rebuild. For the first time in a long time, Jack felt a surge of hope. They might not have all the answers, but they had something far more powerful, a community that cared. Together, they would face whatever came next. With the help of the townspeople, Jack and May's land began to show signs of life again. The crops they had once thought hopeless began to sprout, and the cattle that had been on the verge of dying now grazed peacefully. Each day felt like a small victory, a reminder of how far they had come. The town, once cold and unwelcoming, had started to feel like home. The people who had once turned their backs on them were now working alongside them, lending a hand whenever it was needed. The sense of community that had been lacking for so long had slowly started to take root, and for the first time in years, Jack felt like he was part of something bigger than himself. May, too, had started to feel a sense of belonging she had never known. The whispers and the judgment that once followed her everywhere were fading. The small gestures of kindness from the townspeople, the nods of recognition as she passed by, began to lift her spirit in ways she hadn't expected. She had spent so long feeling like an outsider, but now, she was beginning to see that the world didn't have to be as harsh as it once seemed. She had Jack by her side, and that was all she needed. As the months passed, Jack and May's life settled into a new rhythm. They worked the land together, their days filled with simple joys and shared tasks. Their bond, forged in the fires of adversity, grew stronger with each passing day. They were no longer fighting alone. They had each other, and they had a community that supported them. They were building a life they could both be proud of. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, watching the sun set over the land they had worked so hard to cultivate, Jack turned to May, his heart full of gratitude. "I never thought it would be like this," he said quietly. "I never thought I'd find someone who could make me believe in this life again. But you've changed everything." May smiled, her eyes warm with affection. "We've changed everything," she said, her voice steady but full of emotion. "We've built something together, Jack, and we're going to keep building it." Jack took her hand, squeezing it gently. "I used to think that I was meant to do everything on my own," he said. "But now I know I don't have to. You've shown me that. You've shown me what it means to truly live." May leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder as they sat in the quiet evening. For the first time in her life, she felt at peace. She had spent so many years thinking that love and acceptance were things that didn't belong to people like her. But now, with Jack, she knew that wasn't true. She was worthy of love, and together, they had created something beautiful. The future wasn't without its challenges, but for the first time in a long time, Jack and May were ready to face them. They had come so far, and they knew they were stronger together than they had ever been apart. The next day, as they worked side by side in the fields, May looked at Jack and saw the man he had become. He was no longer the solitary figure who had buried himself in his past. He had found a new purpose, one that was grounded in the love they shared and the life they were building. She saw in him the same quiet strength that had drawn her to him in the first place, and it made her heart swell with pride. As the seasons changed and the land continued to flourish, Jack and May found themselves dreaming of the future. They talked about expanding the farm, about building a home that was truly theirs, and about what they could do to give back to the community that had helped them when they had nothing. For the first time in a long time, Jack could see a future filled with hope. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew one thing for certain. May would be by his side. And with her, he was ready to face anything. The love they shared, the life they had built, was more than enough. Together, they had found something that many people spend their whole lives searching for, a sense of belonging, a place where they were truly seen, truly loved. And that was the greatest gift of all. As they stood side by side, looking out over the land they had worked so hard to cultivate, they knew that they had finally found their home, not just in the land, but in each other. And that, more than anything, was what made all the difference.